Nobody touches my husband's legacy. With one lightning-fast move, Aria knocked down the man threatening her family. Before the frozen guests could even blink, she sent the giant crashing to the marble floor. Her husband, the most feared mafia boss in Seoul, realized at that moment that the quiet woman he married was not a trophy, she was his most dangerous secret. The silver blade was inches from Aria Bennett-Kang's throat, until she moved. She twisted her body, grabbed the attacker's wrist, and slammed him into a gold pillar with a bone-crushing thud. The man's scream echoed through the silent ballroom as the high society guests stared in horror. Aria stood over him, her breathing calm. Not a single hair of her elegant updo was out of place, but a drop of red now spotted her sapphire blue gown. Across the room, the powerful men of the underworld froze. Her husband's rival, Seo Min-taek, dropped his wine glass. It shattered against the floor, mirroring the shock on everyone's faces. They had all spent years calling Aria a graceful decoration. Now, they were looking into the eyes of a predator. The silence in the ballroom was heavier than the music had been. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Choi lay on the marble floor, gasping for air, while the elite of Seoul stared at the woman in the sapphire blue gown. Aria didn't stay to watch them gape. She turned on her heel, the slit of her dress revealing a steady, confident stride as she walked out of the gala. The moment she stepped into the black sedan waiting outside, the calm mask didn't slip, but her mind began to race. Her phone was already buzzing with alerts. By the time the car reached the BO Syndicate's private headquarters, the news had traveled faster than a bullet. Inside the glass-walled office, the air was thick with panic. 5 of Jae-hyun's top lieutenants were shouting at each other. They stopped the second Aria walked in. "Aria, what have you done?" one man yelled, slamming his hand on a mahogany table. "Choi is Min-taek's right hand. You just started a war while the boss is still in a hospital bed." "The war was already started," Aria said, her voice cutting through their fear like a blade. "They were laughing at us. They thought the BO Syndicate was a house of cards because Jae-hyun is sidelined. If I hadn't dropped that man, they would have been at our front door by morning." "You're just his wife," another lieutenant barked. "You don't understand how this works. The docks are in chaos, the money isn't moving, and now our rivals have a reason to finish us off. We need a leader, not a scandal in a blue dress." Aria walked toward the head of the table, the seat that belonged to her husband. She didn't sit in it, but she stood behind it, resting her hands on the leather back. "Jae-hyun is recovering. Until he stands up, I am the voice of this family. If any of you think you can do better, step forward." The men looked at each other. They were tough, but they were disorganized. They were used to following orders, not giving them. "We have 3 hours before Min-taek hits our warehouses in Incheon," Aria continued, her voice dropping into a low, tactical tone. "I've already moved the security teams. I've also frozen the offshore accounts Choi was using to fund his men. If you spend your time panicking, you'll lose everything. If you follow me, we win." The lieutenants stared at her. For the first time, they didn't see the blue sapphire. They saw the strategist who had been standing in the shadows for years. The panic in the room didn't disappear, but it changed. It turned into a sharp, cold realization. The king was down, but the queen was ready to play. The doors to the private war room slid shut, leaving Aria alone with Han Do-jin. Do-jin was the syndicate's most loyal soldier and her husband's closest friend. He stood by the window, his face pale and his hands shaking slightly. He had seen Aria floor a giant in a ballroom, and he didn't know what to believe anymore. "Aria, what was that?" Do-jin whispered, finally turning to face her. "The men are terrified. They think you've lost your mind because of the stress. We need to hide you until Jae-hyun wakes up. Min-taek will come for revenge." Aria didn't look terrified. She walked to the large digital map on the wall and tapped a few buttons. A complex grid of shipping routes and bank codes appeared. "Min-taek is already coming, Do-jin. But he isn't coming for a grieving wife. He's coming into a trap I set 6 months ago. Doojin stepped closer, his eyes widening as he looked at the screen. These are the secret routes. Only Jae-hyun and I knew about these. How do you have the codes? Because I wrote them, Aria said. She looked him directly in the eye, her expression calm and sharp. Every major expansion the BO Syndicate has made in the last 3 years started on my laptop. The takeover of the Incheon docks? That was my plan. The way we bypassed the customs office in June? My idea. Jae-hyun is the face and the muscle, but I am the mind. Doojin stumbled back, hitting the edge of the desk. You. But you're the blue Sapphire. You spend your days at charities and tea parties. A perfect cover, isn't it? Aria asked with a small, cold smile. Nobody looks at the foreign wife when they are searching for a mastermind. It allowed me to watch our enemies without them ever hiding their secrets from me. I know Min-taek's bank accounts. I know which of our lieutenants are thinking about betraying us. And right now, I know exactly where the rival hit squads are moving. She handed Doojin a tablet. On it was a detailed tactical play, written with the precision of a general. Jae-hyun trusted me with his life, Aria said, her voice dropping to a serious, commanding tone. Now, you have to decide if you trust me with the syndicate. The graceful wife is gone, Doojin. The strategist is awake. Are you with me? Doojin looked at the tablet, then back at the woman in the torn sapphire gown. He saw the fire in her eyes and realized he had been underestimating the most dangerous person in Seoul. He straightened his suit jacket and bowed his head deeply. I am with you, ma'am, he said. What is our first move? The fog hung thick over the Incheon shipping docks. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, the time when the world is most silent. Huge metal shipping containers sat like giant blocks in the dark. This was the heart of the BO Syndicate's power. If the docks fell, the empire fell. Seo Min-taek stepped out of a black SUV. He adjusted his silk tie and smiled. To him, the night air smelled like victory. He had heard about the incident at the gala. He knew Aria had knocked down his enforcer, but he wasn't afraid. In his mind, she was just a desperate woman acting out because her husband was dying. She is a distraction, Min-taek whispered to his men. She wants us to focus on her little tantrum at the party so we don't see what's happening here. While she plays queen in that sapphire dress, we take her husband's crown. His men, armed and dressed in shadows, moved toward the main warehouse. They bypassed the front gates, moving with the confidence of wolves entering an empty sheepfold. Min-taek followed them, his heart racing with greed. He expected the guards to be asleep or disorganized. He expected the syndicate to be in shambles because their king was in a hospital bed. Sir, the main gate is unlocked, one of his soldiers whispered. Min-taek's smile grew wider. See? They are falling apart. Enter the warehouse. Secure the cargo. By sunrise, this all belongs to me. The heavy metal doors groaned as they slid open. The warehouse was cavernous and pitch black. The only sound was the drip of water from the ceiling and the heavy breathing of Min-taek's crew. They stepped inside, flashlights cutting through the dark like white swords. Suddenly, the massive overhead lights flickered to life. The brightness was blinding. Min-taek shielded his eyes, his heart dropping into his stomach. Welcome, Mr. Seo, a calm, feminine voice echoed through the rafters. Min-taek looked up. High on the metal catwalk, Aria Bennett-Kang stood looking down at him. She had traded her sapphire blue gown for a sharp, black tactical suit. Her hair was still up, but her expression was colder than the ocean. Behind her, dozens of BO Syndicate soldiers appeared from behind the containers, their weapons leveled and ready. You thought I was the distraction? Aria asked, her voice echoing off the steel walls. No. The docks were the bait. And you just walked right into the trap. Min-taek looked around. He was surrounded. He realized too late that Aria hadn't been hiding in fear. She had been waiting for him to move exactly where she wanted him. Seo Min-taek felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at the circle of red laser sights dancing across his chest. His men frozen beside him, their hands trembling on their weapons. They were trapped like rats in a cage, and the cage was made of cold, hard steel. "This is impossible," Mintake stammered, looking up at Aria on the catwalk. "You're a foreigner. You're a wife. You couldn't have known we were coming tonight." Aria leaned against the metal railing, looking down at him with pity. "I didn't just know you were coming, Mintake. I chose the time. I leaked the security codes for the front gate. I made sure the guards looked tired. I gave you every reason to feel brave." She tapped a tablet in her hand, and suddenly, the large screens on the warehouse walls flickered to life. They showed live feeds of Mintake's other hideouts across the city. In every video, BO Syndicate soldiers were already moving in, seizing his assets and disarming his guards. "While you were busy dreaming about my husband's chair," Aria said, her voice steady and sharp, "I was dismantling your entire life. You thought I was a distraction because you think women are weak. That pride was your biggest mistake." Mintake's lead soldier tried to lift his gun, but a warning shot barked from the shadows, hitting the concrete at his feet. The echo was deafening. "Drop them," Aria commanded. One by one, Mintake's men let their weapons clang onto the floor. They knew when they were beaten. Mintake sank to his knees, the weight of his defeat finally hitting him. He had come here to be a king, but he was leaving as a prisoner. Han Dujin stepped out from behind a shipping container, a look of pure awe on his face. He had watched Aria work for years, but seeing her command the battlefield was different. She wasn't just the wife anymore. She was the general. Aria walked down the metal stairs, her boots clicking softly on the floor. She stopped just a few feet from Mintake. "You wanted to see how the syndicate runs without Jae-hyun," she said quietly. "Now you know. It runs better." She turned to Dujin without looking back. "Clear the warehouse. Take the prisoners to the holding cells. I have a daughter to tuck into bed." As she walked toward the exit, the soldiers parted for her like the Red Sea. They didn't just respect her, they feared her. The checkmate was complete. The black sedan sped away from the docks, but Aria's heart didn't slow down. She checked her watch. It was almost 4 in the morning. She just wanted to hold her daughter and forget the smell of gunpowder. Her phone buzzed in her lap. It was an unknown number. When she answered, she didn't hear a voice. Instead, she heard the soft, rhythmic sound of a music box playing a lullaby. It was the exact tune that played in Jess' bedroom. Aria's blood turned to ice. "If you want to see your little princess again, bring the dock keys to the old bridge," a raspy voice whispered. "You showed everyone how tough you are tonight, Aria. Let's see how tough you are when your heart is in our hands." The call ended. Aria didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, a terrifying heat rose up inside her. If Mintake's remaining men thought she was dangerous before, they had no idea what happened when they touched her child. "Turn the car around," Aria said. Her voice was so low it sounded like a growl. "Ma'am? The bridge?" the driver asked. "No," Aria said, tapping a tracking app on her phone. She had hidden a tiny GPS chip inside Jess' favorite teddy bear months ago. "They aren't at the bridge. They're at the safe house near the park. And they aren't expecting a negotiation. They're expecting a victim. They're going to get a monster." 10 minutes later, the car screeched to a halt in front of a small, dark house. Aria didn't wait for her guards. She kicked the front door open with a force that shattered the lock. Inside, 2 men were standing over a sleeping Ji. One of them held a jagged knife. He looked up, his eyes widening as Aria stormed in. He didn't see a Mafia wife anymore. He saw a mother lion whose cub was in danger. Aria didn't use a gun. She grabbed a heavy glass vase from the hallway and smashed it across the first man's head. As the second man lunged at her, she caught his arm and twisted it until the bones snapped. She didn't stop there. She threw him against the wall and struck him again and again until he stopped moving. Her knuckles were bruised, and her eyes were wild. She reached the bed and scooped into her arms. The little girl stirred, rubbing her eyes. "Mommy," he whispered, seeing her mother's shadow. "Is it time to go home?" Aria tucked the girl's head against her shoulder, shielding her eyes from the broken men on the floor. Her breathing was heavy, but her hands were steady. "Yes, baby," Aria whispered, her voice returning to a soft, sweet hum. "Mommy's here. No one is ever going to hurt you again." Aria stood in the hallway of the syndicate's headquarters. She had just tucked into a secret, guarded room. Her knuckles were still sore from the fight at the safe house, but she didn't have time to rest. Downstairs, in the main boardroom, a different kind of war was brewing. Through the thick glass doors, she could hear the shouting. 3 of Jaehyun's oldest lieutenants were pacing like hungry wolves. They had heard about the kidnapping attempt, and they were using it as an excuse to seize power. "She's a liability," Lieutenant Park yelled. "Her daughter was almost taken. Her focus is split. We need to take control of the accounts before she loses everything." Aria pushed the doors open. The heavy wood hit the walls with a bang. The room went silent. She didn't look like the woman in the sapphire gown anymore. She looked like a shadow brought to life. She walked to the head of the table and sat down in her husband's chair. "I heard you were worried about my focus," Aria said. She placed her phone on the table. It was playing a silent video of the men she had just broken at the safe house. The lieutenants looked at the screen and then back at her. They saw the coldness in her eyes. "We are just thinking of the family, Aria," Park stammered, his voice losing its edge. "A mother's heart can be a weakness in this business." "A mother's heart is why those men are in the hospital," Aria replied. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that filled the room. "But let's talk about your hearts. Lieutenant Park, I know about the secret apartment you bought in Macau with syndicate money. Lieutenant Kim, I have the recordings of your phone calls with Seo Min-taek's brother." The men froze. The color drained from their faces. They had spent years thinking Aria was just a pretty face at dinner parties. They never realized she was the one monitoring their every move. "I don't need to fight you," Aria said, tapping a key on her laptop. "I just need to press send. In 1 second, your bank accounts will be empty, and your locations will be sent to the police. Or, I can send them to the cleaners, who work for the rival gangs you tried to join. Which would you prefer?" The lieutenants looked at each other. They weren't just outmatched, they were erased. Aria wasn't using a gun. She was using the truth, and it was much more painful. "We were mistaken," Kim whispered, bowing his head. "Good," Aria said, standing up. "Because I don't have time for a mutiny. I have a rival to bury. Now, get out of my sight and do your jobs." The invitation was sent on thick, cream-colored paper. It looked like an invite to a royal wedding, but it was a death warrant. Aria had invited Seo Min-taek to a private tea house on the outskirts of Seoul. The message was simple: let us end this tonight for the sake of the city. Min-taek arrived with 6 armed men. He walked into the quiet room with his chin held high. He thought he had won. In his mind, Aria was finally folding. She had saved her daughter, but he believed the stress had broken her spirit. He expected to see a tired woman ready to hand over the keys to the empire. Instead, he found Aria sitting alone at a low wooden table. She was dressed in a simple, sharp white suit. A single pot of tea steamed between them. No guards were in sight. "Sit down, Min-taek," Aria said. Her voice was as calm as the still water in the garden outside. "You have caused a lot of trouble for a man who is about to lose everything." Min-taek laughed and pulled out a chair. "Lose everything? I have the docs. I have your husband's men shivering in fear. You are the one asking for peace, Aria. Tell me, what are you willing to give me to stay alive?" "I'm not giving you anything," Aria said, pouring him a cup of tea. "I brought you here to show you the price of disrespect." Min-taek reached for his tea, but then he noticed something. The silent tea house was too quiet. He looked at his men standing by the door. They weren't moving. One by one, they slumped against the wall, their eyes rolling back. They hadn't been shot. They had been drugged by the incense burning in the corners of the room. Min-taek tried to stand up, but his legs felt like lead. He looked at the tea, then at Aria's cold, steady eyes. "The incense is a special blend," Aria whispered, leaning across the table. "It takes a few minutes to work. You were so busy gloating that you didn't notice the scent." "You can't do this," Min-taek gasped, his tongue feeling thick in his mouth. "The other families, they won't let a woman murder a boss at a peace talk." "This isn't a murder," Aria said, standing up and looking down at him. "This is a repossession. While you were walking in here, my teams were taking back the docks. Your bank accounts are being drained as we speak. By tomorrow, Seo Min-taek will be a name that everyone forgets." She leaned closer, her shadow falling over his face. "You touched my family. That was your only mistake, and it was your last." Min-taek's head hit the table with a soft thud. He was conscious, but he couldn't move a finger. He could only watch as Aria walked out of the room, leaving him in the dark. The Latte Hotel ballroom was empty now, but the ghost of the gala still hung in the air. Shattered glass from the night before had been swept away, leaving the marble floor cold and shining. Aria stood in the center of the room, exactly where she had knocked down Choi. This time, she wasn't wearing a sapphire gown. She wore a black coat, and her eyes were as hard as flint. In front of her, Seo Min-taek sat in a lone chair. He was awake now, but he looked like a broken man. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his hands trembled as they rested on a stack of legal papers. "Sign them," Aria said. Her voice echoed off the high, gilded ceilings. "This is everything," Min-taek whispered, his voice cracking. "My ships, my warehouses, my family's land. If I sign this, I have nothing." "If you don't sign this," Aria replied, stepping into the light of the chandelier, "you have no future. Outside those doors, the police are coming to ask about the kidnapping of my daughter. Behind them are the cleaners who work for the other syndicates. They don't like bosses who lose. They especially don't like bosses who lose to a decorative wife." Min-taek looked at the pen in his hand. He looked at the doors, then back at Aria. He saw no mercy in her face. He realized that the woman standing before him was more terrifying than any hitman he had ever hired. She hadn't used a single bullet to destroy him. She had used his own greed and her superior mind. With a shaky hand, Min-taek scribbled his name on the final page. Aria picked up the papers and checked the signatures. She nodded to Han Do-jin, who stood in the shadows. "Notify the authorities. Tell them we found Mr. Seo here, ready to confess his crimes and retire from public life." "You're leaving me for the police?" Min-taek gasped. "The police will keep you safer than the streets will," Aria said, turning her back on him. "Consider it my final act of grace." As she walked toward the exit, the sun began to peek through the tall windows. The golden light hit the marble, making it glow. The chaos of the last 48 hours was over. The rivals were gone, the traitors were silent, and the empire was hers. She had entered this room as a wife, but she was leaving it as the undisputed queen of the BO syndicate. The hospital room was quiet when Kang Jae-hyun finally opened his eyes. The morning sun streamed through the window, warming the white sheets. He felt the ache in his chest from the ambush, but he felt something else, too, a strange sense of peace. He expected to wake up to a city in flames and his empire in ruins. Instead, he saw Aria. She was sitting in a chair by his bed, reading a digital report on a tablet. She looked perfect. Her hair was neat and her expression was calm. When she saw him move, a soft smile touched her lips. "Welcome back, Jae-hyun," she said softly. She reached out and took his hand. Her grip was firm and steady. "Aria," he croaked, his voice dry. "What happened?" "Min-taek, the docks, the lieutenants." "Rest," she said, handing him a glass of water. "Min-taek is in a jail cell. The docks are secure, and the lieutenants are currently working harder than they ever have in their lives." Jae-hyun blinked in surprise. He looked at the tablet in her hand. He saw the numbers. The profits were up, the rivals were gone, and the BO syndicate was more powerful than the day he had fallen. He looked at his wife, really looking at her for the first time. He saw the faint bruise on her knuckles and the steel in her gaze. "You did this," he whispered, his heart swelling with a mix of shock and pride. "How?" "They thought I was just a blue sapphire, Ji-hyun," Aria said, leaning closer. "I let them believe it until they crossed the line. I protected our daughter. I protected our home. And I reminded everyone in Seoul that the Kang family does not break." Jae-hyun reached up and touched her cheek. For years, he thought he was protecting a delicate flower. He realized now that he had been standing beside a lioness. She hadn't just kept his seat warm, she had built a bigger throne. "I thought I married a queen to sit beside me," Jae-hyun said, a smirk forming on his face despite the pain. "I didn't realize I married a general." "I am both," Aria replied. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. "And from now on we run this city together. No more secrets. No more shadows." Jae-hyun nodded, closing his eyes. He knew the underworld would never be the same. The era of the lone king was over. The era of the power couple had begun. Aria stood by the window, looking out over the city of Seoul. It was bright, beautiful, and completely hers.